Greetings, everyone. I am the Honorable Lord Drake Ormwood of the East Kingdom. Thank you all, and I was very honored to be invited to offer a class on developing stage presence as a bard. It was a new request. I'd never been asked about that topic before. I believe it came from Brendan O'Corey, who is a good friend, and I was deeply flattered and honored to at the suggestion that that was a topic he felt I could offer wisdom on. We'll find out whether he's right or not shortly. So my objectives for this class, as I reflected on the last couple of weeks, were to try to get us to a place where at the end of this, you should be able to express what you think it means to have stage presence, because obviously it helps to understand what we're talking about. Have a little understanding of the distinction between the stage presence of a modern stage performer and the stage presence of an SCA bard, noting, of course, these are all my opinions, and your mileage may vary. You might be able to think through and explain to someone else how preparation as a performer enhances your power and your presence for an audience. Because I was very tempted to just say, well, it's just talent. Cool, we're done. And then the other piece is that hopefully you'll be able to come away with maybe 2 or 3 areas of your own performance that you want to strengthen in order to increase your presence and your power as a performer. And what are some of the next steps to consider to get you there, to set goals for yourself? So I'll start, and I'm going to invite the people who are not reading along to answer, if they would. When you hear the phrase stage presence, what comes to your mind? Anybody? Just call out if you have something in mind.
A connection with the audience?
And ability. Yeah.
What was the second one?
Ability to hold an audience.
Excellent.
Confidence in your material.
Comportment.
Ooh, comportment. I like that. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit more?
I'm coming from a professor lecturer position, so being in front of class and recognizing people are watching you and you have to communicate to them.
Nice. I like that a lot. Anything else? Because you guys are hitting a whole bunch of the points that I have ready to talk about, and I like that.
Commanding attention.
Yes. Excellent.
Ingeborg has mentioned power in the
Say that
chat.
last one again, Ines.
Ingeborg has mentioned power in the chat.
Yes, thank you. I did see that. Yes, thank you. That's a terrific one. Power is a word that I definitely know. I put in my notes a few times. We'll talk about that.
I tend to kind of think of it as a persona that you portray on stage that may or may not be exactly the real you.
I think that's very true and really apt. There's a reason I made the choice, and I see that some people did and some people did not. This is a class, so it's all good. That I made a very conscious choice to gussy myself up more than I even normally do for an online thing if I'm supposed to be in persona. I went out of my way to put on my standard stage performance studs. This is typically this is stage performance garb. My court performance garb is a different outfit. I mentioned that in the context that what I'm presenting for you right now is the result of a series of conscious choices I made, and a series of unconscious choices I doubtless made as well. As to who Drake was going to be when I get up on stage, that's my goal. And some of the performers that I will probably take a moment to acknowledge and discuss this evening as well have been exemplars of that. I have a tiny sampling of a massive list. Have you been in the SCA? Have you seen the performers we have? They're amazing. and that some of them, including ones that are seasoned, thought this was a topic I would be in a position to lecture on, just delights and humbles me. But I really like those pieces. So I'll speak to some of the thoughts that came to my mind, which overlap a lot of this. Confidence, which I think was one of the ones that was mentioned. And confidence here, I tried to frame these in terms of the service as a performer that you're providing the audience in your stage presence, because I think that's really important. It's very easy, particularly for people who don't necessarily naturally and instinctively overcome audience shyness, or who don't assume that they have a big command of stage presence, to be concerned that filling themselves up, standing as tall as they can and commanding space is an act of ego, which it absolutely can be, and it can be both and here. When I do it, I assure you, and anybody who knows me well will tell you, it is absolutely an act of ego. It has taken a decade or so, and this March marks about almost exactly 10 years from the time I first said, you know what, I'm going to do it. I want to be active in the SCA again. Our kid is old enough, and I want to be a bard, and that's going to be my thing. And one of my friends told me that they thought I'd be good at it, and I want to see if they're right or not, and I think I'm going to prove them right. 10 years this March. In that time, I have learned some humbling lessons about the balance between ego and serving your audience. I had a wonderful teacher who I spent an early year with, Lucien de Pontivy of the East. And people had been trying to invite me to dial back a little bit for years. And Lucien was amazing at Socratic questions. And she found a way to get me to think about this so that she could slip that question in without my getting defensive. And she invited me to assess a bunch of performers at a kingdom competition that I was competing in. And I took some time, wrote some notes, shared them with her. And she said, now, I want to invite you to use that same analytic process on the performance you gave at the competition, particularly vis-a-vis your energy level relative to the audience. And in a flash, I saw it. I was singeing audiences' eyebrows off. I was coming in with what Lucien liked to call the furnace, full of you know, energy and filling the room to the extent that I was sucking the oxygen out of it and dialing things to 12 when the audience barely knew me. And these were things that were not going to really be in the service of stage presence. Was I commanding? Yes. Was I confident? Probably more than perhaps I merited at the time, maybe even now. And was I using all of the tools at my disposal in service to the audience? Because to communicate with an audience, to engage an audience, to draw an audience into the story that I'm telling, they need to be comfortable. They need to be comfortable, especially if, as is often the case, certainly for me, my goal may be to make them uncomfortable, to make them feel things that aren't all pleasure and laughter and light. I may want to see if I can engage their sadness. Heck, I might have some things I want to say that are critical of the society, critical of my own community. I may make them uncomfortable to the point that they might feel a little bit of shame. If I'm going to do that, though, for it to be effective, I want them to still be smiling by the end. I want them to be applauding. I don't want them to feel lectured. I don't want them to feel condescended to. To do all those things, I need to project to them that they are in good hands, that they are in safe hands, the confident hands of a performer who knows what they're doing. That is the goal. That looking back, when I started to analyze this and say, what would I have to teach? That I invite each of you to consider. Confidence in a performer conveys not only power, but warmth. Warmth is a phenomenal quality to radiate. People who feel that someone is warm can take that deep breath, can start to just lean in, start to stop thinking about how comfortable their seats are or what they're planning to do after. Warmth draws one in. Marion of Heatherdale, if you've had the privilege of seeing her perform, is one of the warmest performers, and I'm ever grateful. She's also one of the most generous patrons of the arts that I know in the society, and there are many. She dedicates herself in every audience. I remember, actually, at the risk of telling a story that will sound like a humble brag, I had the great privilege of getting to be a guest performer in her concert a number of years ago, and at the time it was, oh yes, this is, oh my god, yes, so, checkbox, mission accomplished, bucket list. But the moment before she brought me on stage is a great example of a performer with incredible stage presence, using it in service of their audience and their collaborators and guests. She had just finished sharing a piece about the tragedy of Camelot. I think it might have been the trial of Guinevere. It was definitely way at the end of the tragic arc of the Camelot tale. And she gave it all the way she does. She knows how to bring that pathos and brought the audience to that place. And at the end of that, after the applause died down, she paused and said, oh my, what a state I've got you in. This is no way to greet our first guest. And so she very consciously, for my benefit, to make sure that the audience that I was about to receive would be in the upbeat, open-hearted, excited mood that she wanted to make sure I was going to get, chose to switch to follow it up with a piece to completely change up the mood, this lighthearted, frothy, silly thing about a French pony and the noise it makes as she galloped around the stage. And it was adorable. And everybody was laughing and everybody's chest just loosened up. And it meant that when I stepped out on stage a few minutes later as her guest, I got greeted by an audience that was in masterful hands, and she had managed them and made sure they felt safe with me. That is what confidence is. That's what engagement is. That also speaks to another piece, which is enjoyment. No matter what kind of story you're telling, the audience will know whether you are enjoying yourself, whether you have fun being on stage. It doesn't mean you're always going to be beaming. You're going to be in the middle of something, and when you need to take them to that dark place, that's where you are. Presence. And I'm going to skip ahead, and I'm going to jump around. As I said, presence is right there in the name. To have stage presence, you have to be present. Fully present in the moment. Enjoyment is a piece of that. If I see that the performer who's in front of me is enjoying themselves, I instinctively, because we are humans, we are wired with sympathy response, I begin to enjoy myself. Again, it also means that I know I'm in safe hands. And anyone who's ever been in the presence of a performer who clearly was not enjoying themselves knows what I'm talking about. Whether it's that they were nervous, which is understandable, whether it's that something was clearly going on that wasn't about what was on stage and it was pulling their focus. It happens. It's happened to me. The best of us at times have that. But presence is about repeatable practices, finding ways to really get yourself into that space so that you are a vehicle for the story, You are a conduit for the audience. The next piece I'm going to speak to is about authenticity. I completely agree that stage presence often is a version of yourself, what some of my friends like to call perhaps an authentic best version of yourself. That is not your everyday. That is not you when you first get out of bed and haven't had that cup of coffee yet. But even if like a Stephen Colbert in the modern context, who has phenomenal stage presence and has spent a lot of his career portraying someone who is the opposite of what he really believes, but his stage presence is still there. His sense of right and wrong, his sense of what's funny, his sense of what somebody ought to laugh at is always clear to see. Being authentic in performance, which is something that takes time and practice, is a really powerful way. The last few years, I'd like to think I've found some opportunities to share pieces that come from a very personal place I hadn't touched on before. And I've occasionally heard back from people who just saw, they're like, I just saw you open yourself up and take the mask off. And it makes me really excited to see what's coming from you next. Because with authenticity comes vulnerability. The ability to really feel that empathic response, to get lost in a story, is enhanced tremendously. And again, the ability to be a safe container, the privilege as an audience member. This again is something that that Meredith Heatherdale excels at, among many others. We'll talk about some of them in a little bit. These are all some of the ways in which we create space. We create a space that's special, and the audience can sense it, that they're in good hands and that someone's going to carry them along in a river of feeling and ideas and images. A couple of other pieces that I wanted to throw in there were inspiration. Someone with real stage presence can be inspiring. Margarita, I think you're on mute if you're trying to speak to us. Okay. Do you need something? Okay, got it. Just making sure. Knowing what shares and knowing and being able to share things that inspire you. And that gives you the opportunity to be that authentic best self who can be an inspiration to others. I want to speak to uniqueness. Stage presence is in part recognizing what it is about you as a person and your skills as a performer that distinguish you from anybody else that someone's going to see today. That doesn't mean nobody else has the skills you possess, but there, again, if I have to use modern phrasing, sometimes it's important. Your brand. What is it that sums you up? This outfit for me captures someone who is Elizabethan, first and foremost. So I tend to present slightly mannered, bit of a peacock is a piece of my persona. The nickname, the subtitle I like to use for my Penzic concert is Troubadour Next Door. So, you know, I'm going to be jolly and I'm going to do all this stuff, but I'm just this guy. I'm someone surely you can relate to. And we'll see if that plays or not. Sometimes some of the advice I got, your diction. I love your diction. It makes what you say clear, but sometimes it seems very formal. And a little bit of formality is a piece of the Drake persona, because Drake is a court musician and is always aware that he's on. And that works for what I like to do. It means it leans into a lot of the Broadway influence that definitely shaped me as a performer growing up, and shapes a lot of the sensibility in the sorts of music that I like to compose and that I like to perform when I'm not simply filking it. So these are some of the things. So the process of developing that presence is about getting to know yourself, getting to know what you bring to a performance that's distinct, and working through the pieces of you that might be critical of that, honing it to the place that you're really ready to own it. Because I've walked away from competitions. I'm a very competitive person, and I've walked away going, today did not end the way I was imagining it, the way I might have hoped. And when I go home, I'm licking my wounds in the car with my wife, I said, but nobody else at that competition today was Drake or Armwood. No, I'm definitely never driven by ego, I promise. So let's talk now about stage presence for a bard. And some of this has probably already kind of come into the conversation, but what does it mean to do this as an SCA bard? That's different from doing this as a modern theater performer, of which I know a lot of bards I've met come from that background. I came from, college and community theater background. And the wonderful thing is that this gives you a lot of great tools if that's your background, or studying an instrument. There's all sorts of modern contexts for performers, as well as our current King's Bard of the East, who has decades under his belt as a Renaissance performer, and he's phenomenal. He does Ren fairs, and he does it amazingly. And like me, he had a few years of butting his head against it, figuring out how to hone what he did well into something that the SCA audience and a Kingdom audience would resonate with enough to trust him to be, a premier bard for the Kingdom. And so there's a lot of pieces. Does anybody have thoughts about, are there any habits that you've had to unlearn as you came into the SCA mode of performance?
If I may step in,
Sure.
I find that, and I commented in the chat that I'm still trying to develop my brand, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
I come into this, I've been in and out of the SCA for 30 years. And, but I am primarily, when I'm not in SCA mode, a jazz and folk singer. And trying to sort of meet with the SCA audience, I'm still finding a bit difficult.
Oh yeah, I said my first few years especially. I'd run into that, and a challenge in the SCA that probably many of you know is that courtesy is our byword. Courtesy is about not making people feel uncomfortable, which means if you found something lacking, or there's something that you'd love to see someone shift or hone or develop a little differently in their performance, it can be difficult to figure out how to offer assistance, because we don't want to offer assistance where it's not welcome. And we hate confrontation. That sometimes means that you can go a few years thinking you're doing really well, and there's things that people have wanted to say to you that no one has said to you. Fortunately, I see a lot of Broadway in you was something that people felt comfortable saying, even though I know it wasn't always an unfettered compliment for a bard. I'm glad to hear that, Toppy. Some of the things that came up. So Ines, thank you for sharing what you were saying on the chat. I had let it fall out of my line of sight, so I appreciate you sharing it with us. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge the piece. I want to say it again because this is a great line. We all want to be a hard act to follow. Thank you, Taliesin. But being a hard act to follow is not an act of kindness, which I'm guessing was probably a piece of what Marion had shown me. The willingness to make sure that you're not a hard act to follow. I get it. I know that feeling too. So the challenge for you, Ines, may be about identifying what are the elements of folk music and jazz that in some ways manifest in a medieval persona, even if they may, they may display a little differently than they do in the modern context. There may be things, however, you can draw out of that when you find the right way to put them in this framework will really add power and distinction to what you can offer. Just a thought. Davik, I see you have your hand up. Did I get your name right?
Yes, you did.
Thank you.
There's something that a lot of performers, if they're used to performing as a stage performer, for example, there is a big difference between a stage performance and a Bardic Circle performance.
Yes.
That's a completely different environment, and you have to recognize that it's a different environment and that you have to adapt to the new environment. If you're not used to it, it can be difficult to adapt to the new environment. But that is something that everybody needs to be aware of if their experience, their prior performance venue is more of a stage type of setup. And that's actually mine, because I'm operatically trained. I have a Celtic folk band, and I'm a performer on stage, and so that's the small circle is a completely different environment for me, and that's something I've had to adapt to.
Yes, I was going to say, and a big piece of that is certainly as a stage performer, I got trained early in the whole concept of the proscenium arch and the fourth wall. The idea that, particularly when I'm performing in a play, that engaging directly with the audience violates that compact. It puts them on the spot, it makes them uncomfortable, and it breaks the illusion that they're invisible observers, which is a very different premise than most Bardic performance, either in a circle or really on stage, typically as a bard. We're generally trying to recreate a tradition that mostly predates that, a tradition that is communal. And so we're usually trying to recreate the experience of maybe a wandering storyteller, or indeed just a community storyteller who engaged directly with the audience, who's always present. This is Bardic usually, and often at its best, is a community experience where the audience are, I mean, quite literally, because we're a band of geeks, are your friends. And they're here for you, and they're here to support you. And looking them in the eye is a powerful piece of that. 1 second, Sarah. I just want to, Luna had her hand up, and I want to give her a chance to speak up. Go ahead if you'll unmute.
Yeah, so speaking of Bardic circles, I know I also come from a stage background, which is totally different, opera, liturgical. But I found that a lot of the groups have been meeting casually online to this sort of like work group workshop.
Yeah.
So if you want to try something out and you want, creative feedback, I encourage you to join those groups, because they can essentially be your guinea pigs. They're your test board. So you can perform for them something that you're preparing, and then they'll give you feedback on, what they hear. And it's all a friendly group. So, they're all going to be encouraging and positive and give you tips on what they hear, what they don't, because everybody has a different perspective and a different ear. So it might be useful for you to look at the some of the Facebook groups have links too, but they'll meet once a week, and it's super casual, super friendly. So if you have things that you want to soundboard on, join up and perform or just listen. I found it really helpful for myself too, because it's like a whole different animal for me. So it was nice to hear from people that have been doing this longer than I have.
Thank you so much, Lena. That was terrific. And you're ahead of me, because that was definitely down in the notes. I know I'm going to talk about that finding safe audiences, finding safe spaces, and knowing the difference, and recognizing that wherever you are in your journey, that there are opportunities to find the right friendly audience. And then eventually, right, since that's sort of what a talk about stage presence is presumably about, preparing for an audience that might be a little outside your current comfort zone. We'll talk about comfort zone in a moment too. Tegan, is that correct?
That is correct. What I wanted to say was that sometimes with the difference between like a Bardic circle and a concert or stage performance is the vulnerability of the artists themselves, because in the casual setting, you're exposing yourself. And when you're on a stage, you are the character that you are showing. Even if that character is you, it is still a character. Whereas in some of these more casual settings, you, the artist, are the one that is exposing your vulnerability and, you know, putting yourself out there in that way. And it affects how you present yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm going to take a moment because I know there's a few comments I wanted to make sure get shared on here from the chat. I saw from Tally Essen of Callantyre. I was very lucky to be offered assistance super early on. It's been super helpful. We'll talk about that too, because getting there is never meant to be a solo effort. One of the most amazing things about the society is the tremendous generosity and the willingness of people to share what in our capitalistic society they could absolutely, and many of them do, charge money for, you know, or whereas some of them just offered freely. Sometimes artisans who have particular talents work out an effective barter arrangement where they know they're giving each other something of value. Sometimes you're part of a household and this is just what you expect that family to share with each other. Okay, I think I caught those. Thank you, Rojes, did I get that right? Awesome, for sharing the calendar on there as well. I'm going to keep going, and yay, I'm super excited to see that this group is in it, and you're not afraid to accept my invitation to step up and ask questions and add comments, because this is value. So a couple more things I wanted to mention. We talked about it right there, which is the fact that this is an intimate experience. Pretty much all Bardic is. It is an intimate experience as a performer in the Bardic context, and it took me a while to really understand that. I had to let my walls down a degree, even as my stage presence is in many ways a form of armor. But it's also a conduit. It's a way for the audience to understand me and make sense of me. The exciting thing about that is that it too can change. I know people who have more than one persona. I know people who have our current King's Bard, known as Foxy Bard, David Anthony, is a phenomenal multi-instrumentalist. And he also has developed one of the things that I think helped him adapt and really find a way to shine in a way that, particularly in the East Kingdom, where we take our period performance sometimes very seriously. I don't know if you've heard. But in a way they could appreciate, and it drew on, interestingly, a side of himself that he doesn't generally share as a Rene performer, which was his Orthodox Jewish upbringing. So he came up with a rabbinic persona who tells these phenomenal Talmudic stories with fervor and passion, and a very different side from his drunken Irish, pub musician. And he's found ways to incorporate a lot of those pieces, all those different aspects, an authentic best self. And that has freed him up to really, really just knock the socks off an audience. To this day, I still just don't quite know how I managed to glide past him the day that I actually got chosen as Queen's Bard the year before he became our King's Bard. But he brought an amazing version of himself that day. And what I brought that day, I think that worked for me, was I'd gotten clear on what I did best. And he's there now. And his best is a whole bunch of different things, and he's learning how to show it to different audiences. And that is something that I think everybody can learn from. We've talked a little bit about the community and about how you present yourself. We've talked about expressing your personality and your persona in your performance. We've started to talk in the difference between a stage environment and a Bardic circle, that an important part of stage presence for a Bard is being able to recognize quickly, as you step into a space, how much space this venue calls for. How much space do you need to take up? If I bring my full stage persona to a Bardic circle, I singe eyebrows. And I potentially intimidate. And that, as several people pointed out, and it was a great insight, that is not the goal. There's a world of difference between being delightful, being magical, being inspirational, and being intimidating. There's no question. Somebody who brings the work of decades of carefully honed craft and makes it look effortless can scare the hell out of those of us who have some iota of what they've just achieved and made look easy. But the best performers, some of the people I'm happy to call friends and mentors and inspirations, make it very clear that this is not about shutting down anybody else. There is room for everyone here. And the opportunity is for you to learn from the examples you see and absorb, not I need to act like this person, but wow, this person has figured out what they do well and has really leaned into that, what makes them distinct. And the opportunity is to start figuring out, and it will shift over time as you develop, what do I do well? What do I do well, especially if you choose to, because no one has to, but if you choose to. I found a competitive environment was a whetstone. I don't know that I would have developed the degree of ability that I have, which I sometimes still like to deride because I can hear everything I do wrong when I pick up anything that I call a lute, which generally is a lute guitar, though I plan later in the year to take the 7-course Elizabethan lute that has been sitting quietly waiting for its turn and start actually learning to work with it. And musicians that really, really blow my mind say things like, I forgot how good you are at this. And I'm like, oh, right, right, which means I did the thing right. I put the time in and I got confident enough at it that I'm not choking in the middle of performing for you. And you see what I was trying to create and not the time and effort that hopefully went into it. Couple more comments have come up. Yes, if you come in ramped up to the max, you have nowhere to go when you need to emphasize something. Thank you, Maureen. That's a great, great point. One of the things that Lucy was trying to teach me. Yes, experience in college theater, Ines, thank you, Ines Lopez. And I had to do presentations for my course in master graduate in college, though I feel always nervous before being on stage or before doing a presentation. Then I calm down and try to enjoy. Love to sing, but never sang on a stage. We can talk about that too. So let's talk about working on confidence. Because when, just to give an example, when I made the choice to take Lucien's challenge and start trying to learn lute pieces, because I wanted to bring to a competitive environment, one of the things I will just acknowledge, okay, we're all here because we love to grow and learn. That's an intrinsic part of the SCA experience. Every part of what we do, anything we do, whether you are serving, whether you are running an event, whether you are helping to run a kingdom, or the official head that wears the heavy crown that is that is the face of the running the kingdom, or a bard. We are all in the process of developing, learning, growing, shaping, and molding who we are into who we imagine ourselves to be. And this is a process. So one of the things that's been mentioned is that there are safe spaces to develop any new skill, and stepping into that place that scares you is part of that process. So one of the things I wanted to mention is that sometimes you just really want to wow an audience. Let's face it. It's such an amazing feeling when you do it. One of the things that the SCA audiences in particular are wowed by, even when you don't pull all of it off, is when they see you bring a skill that they've never known you had, or they've never seen you. Basically, when you show up at an event and you have leveled up, even if you've gone from level 1 to level 3 on a 10-level presumed scale, SCA audiences are really impressed by that because they understand and they pay attention. They really listen. They really see you. So when you're doing something at a new level from what they've seen before, the key people, the people that are probably going to be in a position to help, who may have influence, who may be in a position to offer you guidance, they're going to notice. And doing that, even when it's tough, even when it's challenging, even when it's uncomfortable for you, is impressive, which is not the same as asking you to step into the abattoir and let yourself get slaughtered. Let's talk about preparation. Let's talk about presence as a function of that. Confidence comes from competence, right? When you know what you're doing, you are freed up to be in the moment. You're freed up to see the audience. One of the challenges that I had been struggling with and continue to struggle with, because I barely touched my loop guitar in the last 6 months. I started picking it up this past week, and the muscle memory is still there, but it's still going to take me a few months to get the polish all back. The reason I bring this one up is because this is the first time I tried to do something in front of an audience that was not a skill that I had more or less acquired some level of by the time I got out of childhood. I took a few piano lessons. I had never taken guitar. I didn't pick up a guitar for the first time until I was in my 30s. To this day, I am not a good guitarist. I still might be one day, but I keep focusing on lute instead, and they're not quite the same skill. I can't strum well to save my life. But I realized that focusing on lute, giving it exclusive focus, and feeling that excruciating pain in my hands as I learned how to get them to stop cramping and loosen up, I trusted the vision that it was going to sound good in 6 months when I went to my next Royal competition. And I picked something that hopefully wasn't too far beyond my level of difficulty that I was able to pull off. I picked something more ambitious a couple of years later, and I was working it, and I was really comfortable. I thought I really had it, or I thought I was really comfortable. And I got up in the first round of Royal Bardic that year. And what I had played through and sung with 5 minutes earlier, quietly off in the bar, before I stepped into the chamber, transformed because my fingers suddenly turned to lead. And I'm in front of an audience, an East Kingdom audience that knows me and is used to seeing me very, very confident. And my fingers are fighting me. And what's happening in that moment is, I'm going to talk about this, is I am choking. And when I say choking, I'm speaking about something very specific. I'm not saying that I'm getting too nervous and I'm failing. I'm freezing up because something that I committed to muscle memory, my conscious overthinking mind is interfering with in the moment. It happens to everyone. When you hear sports commenters talk about what happened to a massive batter who's suddenly struggling this season, he's choking. He's thinking about where to swing when, by the time he's up there at the game, all he should be doing is watching the ball and letting his arms do the job. Because if he didn't get in his own way, they would, because he's practiced it enough times. So powerful performances happen inside your comfort zone. They don't happen necessarily when you're struggling at the edge of your comfort zone, which I chose to do that day. One of the things I had failed to take into account was that balancing all the things I had learned on a really challenging piece, something that as a third-year self-taught lutenist, my ego told me that I should try. And my arms and my readiness, they could not cash that check. I choked. I got through it. And this is another piece I want to mention. What I didn't do, what I do my best not to do, I didn't stop. I didn't apologize. I didn't, you could see the strain. I couldn't hide it. You could see my tempo going off. You could see the tension in my fingers. You could hear that I was missing and dropping beats. But I kept going with what I was doing. Fortunately, I had chosen not to sing. I chose to do it as spoken word, which was interesting and distinct, and it got me through. There was no way looking back after that first round I was actually going to get selected that day, and it took me a while to really absorb that. That in the end, I brought a piece, and people said, you needed to be more prepared. And I was like, I was prepared 5 minutes before I got on stage, which means I wasn't prepared enough. Because what I had done was I had practiced the piece. What I hadn't done was practice the piece in front of a critical audience that made me self-conscious. Because in a competition environment, I was going to be performing that piece in front of a critical audience that was going to make me feel self-conscious. And that was part of the process that needed to be in my muscle memory. I needed to know that I was so good at that piece that I didn't have to ever let the effort show. That took another year. And that took a year choosing a piece that I'd been playing for longer, that I knew wasn't as complicated, but was still quite challenging and pleasing. And when I came out that following year, people were like, damn, Drake leveled up, because I was smiling. I had worked the piece into my muscle memory. I didn't do it flawlessly. I dropped notes, and one or two audience members who were not bards made an offhand comment to that effect. No bards commented on it because they all knew I knew. They didn't need to tell me. And that wasn't the goal. What had happened in that moment, though, was a lot of them had dropped into a moment and suddenly saw a musician with a lute in an Elizabethan court performing John Dowland, as John Dowland in their minds was meant to be heard. Sung gracefully with the counterpoint lute accompaniment that Dowland is famous for, lightly, trippingly. And I had pulled that off, which meant when I wasn't chosen that year and came back the following year, I said, okay, great. Now I have to find a piece that's as hard as the one I tried to do and choked on, and do it better than I did this piece this year. I am not saying that your goal should be a perfectionist that constantly ups, that constantly ramps up things on yourself. Everyone has to decide what works best for them. It was rewarding, though. And ultimately, each time I stepped away from that competition, not having been chosen, I said, hey, remember, you actually did what you were trying to do. You faked yourself out into believing what you really wanted was to be Royal Bard, and you used that as an excuse to make yourself into a lutenist. Because the goal, the persona I had in mind for Drake was a lutenist. I had no basis for ever imagining I could really be a lutenist, but it was how I saw Drake. It took about 5 years. And one step at a time with those goals along the way, I became someone who some people find intimidating, but a lot of people just find pleasant to be around when I pick up a lute. Even though I don't play it perfectly, but I know the pieces I know. And I choose not to do the pieces that I think I'm going to struggle with in front of audiences that shouldn't be distracted by that. So the process of getting there involved expanding my comfort zone so that more challenging pieces were now in my comfort zone and I could do them comfortably. To do that, as I said, I had developed short, medium, and long-term goals, right? This year, I want to be able to perform a lute piece. It doesn't have to be the most challenging, but I want it to be a pretty one. I want to be able to sing and play it confidently all the way through. in front of that level audience. That was my goal. And I worked at it using deliberate practice. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term deliberate practice. It's a good. Does somebody want to try and explicate it? Because I will definitely try, but if you, I'm curious to hear what other people's take on it was. I first heard that one from, I think, Malcolm Gladwell in Outliers. Anybody?
It's challenging yourself at the level just beyond where your comfort zone. And Gladwell's example is not playing a sonata all the way through 7 times, but finding the line that you can't do and playing that line, the one you hate, until you get it right.
Exactly. Deliberate practice is not merely repetitive. It is goal-driven. It requires that you constantly stop, listen, look at, get feedback in some way or other, either by video recording or audio recording what you're doing, by getting someone you trust and can trust your heart with to tell you, you either figure it out yourself or get someone else to show you what's the hole in your swing. Where are the many holes in your swing? And then one by one, focusing on each one and taking the time, the days or the weeks that it requires to focus in on honing that piece until you fix that hole in your swing. And then progressively getting yourself to a place where whatever objective you're after, you have now created a complete skill set where there's no obvious hole in the swing. And by the time you're done, your comfort zone is now a level out from where it was. It is grueling. It is not comfortable. It is more rewarding to someone like me who has ADHD than just rote practices. You know, having that, why am I playing this piece again? I'm playing this piece because there are 16th notes in the piece I'm going to bring this year. It's blazingly fast. And it's how Dowland wrote it. And I'm going to cut a couple of the extra notes out because I don't think I'm going to be able to execute those in time, and no one's going to care because only a handful of people in this audience have actually seen or listened to or played it enough to know that I've dropped some notes to make it easier. It doesn't matter because what's going to happen ideally is I'm not going to choke. I'm going to play those 16 notes brilliantly, or at least perfectly cleanly, as I sing like I don't care it's happening. It's just how the song goes. And they'll notice the beauty and not the effort. And it was 6 months of deliberate practice. I actually put time in. If this sort of thing interests you, the piece in question that I'm talking about, the one that ultimately I played as opening round 2 years ago when I was chosen to be Queen's Bard of the East, that piece was Clear or Cloudy by Dowland. I broke that down in the end. I made the choice. I said, my goal isn't to be a sneak attack person who comes up and nobody can see me coming. No one can do that. I can't do that anymore. I've played loot pieces in competition. Everybody knows that's in my repertoire. I'm not going to learn a new instrument. So why try to trick anybody? I can't. The next piece here is to just be completely vulnerable and start sharing my process as I do it. So I blogged 5 times about the pieces. I developed it over the course of 4 or 5 months. Sharing recordings and videos of, frankly, really not pretty performances of it along the way, but breaking down, oh gosh, is this source right? Is this actually accurate to how Dowland wrote it? There's some differences, I think, between this and the original. I hadn't looked closely. Oh, I'm working on a 6-string instrument. He wrote it for a 7-string instrument. These are reasonable modifications that the person who put this version of the tablature together made, so that on a 6-string instrument, we're getting effectively the same kind of sound. I'm okay with that. I'm going to blog about it. My audience now knows I did the research. I know the piece. And that I'm getting a little too much into my A&S geek here. The goal was, again, to get to that place where what I could give over was a performance. I wanted to be able to flirt. Clear or Cloudy is a very upbeat and bouncy song for Dowland. And I wanted to look when I needed to, because I didn't want to mess up hit the wrong string when I didn't, because I wasn't looking enough. I wanted to have enough muscle memory that hopefully I could play through most of it without looking at the strings. Look when I need to, but the rest of the time be making eye contact with that audience, smiling at them, flirting with them. It's a slightly flirtatious piece. To get there, I ultimately made another key decision about my presentation, which was I recognized that one of the challenges I have, particularly when I'm doing a challenging lute piece, is I can get up in my head and start to read the micro expressions of the audience if I know they're critical. Turns out there's an easy way for me to fix that. I'm nearsighted. I used to perform without my glasses most of the time because I thought it made me look a little more dashing. A couple of years, around the time I was working with Lucian, I made the choice to wear them because how can I connect to an audience that I'm not looking at in the eye and actually seeing? And then I made the further conscious choice that if I'm doing a difficult lute piece and I don't want to choke, and I know that I risk choking, seeing the audience, but they're a little blurry, is kind of a perfect happy medium right now for this particular piece, because I'm going to want to be able to see my lute closely when I need to check it. I can see they're out there. I can read the mood, but I'm not going to see whether someone's looking at my fingers on either hand, and that keeps me from getting up in my head. There will come a day, I hope, when I can play whatever piece I want with my glasses when I want and be completely confident. That day, I made a conscious choice that while I was playing, I didn't wear my glasses. And when I was doing stuff without it, I wore them. And that worked. So the key there was about making sure the performance was a part of me. When I got up that day, the first notes, I just knew. I knew this performance was in my hands. I knew the piece. I loved the piece. I picked it because it's fun. It's so much more fun than most Dowland I know. And I knew that fun was going to communicate itself to the audience. And then I took breaks, because as you're doing this kind of work to build up your presence, to get solid on a piece. And again, I'm not saying your goal is to master something that you don't think you're any good at right now and make yourself miserable. At that point in my work as a bard, that fed me. The idea of the look on people's faces, particularly in the East, of bringing the whole package that day. That was an ambition I had for that persona at that moment. But it's about whatever it is. It's about, for some people, it's going to be about performing off book. And I'm not saying that having words in front of you is something you shouldn't do. This is a debate we have a lot in the Bardic community. If you need it, use it. If you can confidently know that this is here to back me up, as someone who, as I've gotten older and I've learned more and more pieces, my repertoire has grown. One thing I've definitely done, I have face planted in front of audiences. I have gone up on lines in a song I wrote and have performed dozens of times, because at this point, I now have more than a dozen of those. And if I haven't looked at it for at least an hour in the last few days, I don't know it cold anymore. And it took me some humbling moments. Fortunately, those were largely at Bardic circles. Only one of them was at a concert, to realize that I needed to review. If I'm going to bring up a piece I haven't done in a while, I have my phone. All of my lyrics are on the website. I'll get it. Some people, it's going to be about their pitch. Some people, it's going to be about recognizing how to do business. You know, I'm telling this story. Let's take a moment. This is a big piece I want to take a moment to mention, which is let's talk a little bit about physical presence, developing stage presence. We'll probably come back to a few other things. I think they're all getting mixed in anyway, and if not, they're in the notes. Okay, I'm gonna cheat. I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to sing to you, if that's okay. I'm going to sing just the chorus from a song that I wrote specifically that I believe probably was one of the things that inspired Brendan to think of me for this class. The piece is actually about the divide in the performance community between those who focus primarily on the moment and the enjoyment of the audience and often original work, and those who focus primarily, as if these are incompatible, and sometimes they are, on extant period work, on historically sourced and informed period pieces or period style pieces. Some people can do both and do them both really, really well. Many of us struggle and choose or have a preferred style. I came in really as a songwriter who wanted to do SCA folk, and I still do. I love doing SCA folk. I've learned over time that finding different ways to historically inform the SCA folk I create and share has made the experience richer for me, has made the challenges of writing the songs more fun. But the idea behind the song was that regardless of where you come from or where you approach it, in the end, you have to get up in front of an audience. And when you get up in front of an audience, you have to do the things that are necessary to ground yourself and be fully present. And I took advice from Misterno Zof of the Midrealm, who was my Laurel for about 5 years, and the likes of Master John Littleton, currently of Trimaris, who offers masterclasses. And there were certain key things that I noticed I got again and again, and I tried to distill that wisdom into the chorus, which I come back to each time. Because in the end, whether you're performing original work or whether you're performing period work, in the end, you have to get up in front of the audience and do the following. Plant your feet in the earth and stand. Take a breath, be still and strong. Look each listener in the eye. Your connection is through your song. Craft and polish each note, each word. Time is short and the work is hard. Wield your voice and embrace your truth. They're the instruments of a bard. These are the instruments of a bard. And then I go on. Thank you. But the fun of it is that when I thought about this, I kept coming back to that. And tonight it just occurred to me. I was like, let me just sing the damn thing, because it actually captures a whole bunch of things that I think are really important and relevant. And apparently, I think Brendan told me there was a time when I happened to perform that, and he was starting to get up in his own head about whether what he was about to do was perhaps not going to go over as well as he'd hoped. I think I closed with that song. And he listened to it and he said, oh, right, that's all I have to do. Thank you, Drake. And he came up and he killed it. And he told me about that later. And it just was the most delightful feeling knowing that I'd written lyrics that at that moment and that day helped reassure him and recenter him, because he's a killer performer. And it was great to remember that I'm not the only person who worries about choking. Luna, I saw you had your hand up for a moment. Is there something you wanted to ask?
Oh, no, I was just doing a virtual clap. That was very nice.
No worries. Okay. Does anybody have a question at this point? Because we have a few more pieces that we can talk about. The good news is I feel like I've covered most of the mission critical material. Sarah, yes.
What is the title of that piece that you just sang the chorus of?
Plant Your Feet.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can find it on the website. It is one of the pieces, I'll just mention, shameless plug, that The work on my second solo album has been delayed by gestures and everything. And it is resuming. Most of the recording for that song is actually done. The magnificent Juliana Bird of the East and Mid Realm, often known as Bird the Bard, is on all over that piece. I can't wait to share it because they are harmonizing with me on it, providing English horn, I believe, as well as tin whistle. And I think it's coming together really nicely. So there will be a lot of fun with that. But yeah, that's a piece that is by bards about bards. Sorry. Let me come back into the moment. A couple of more things I wanted to say about your presence as a function of preparation. So, in case it hasn't become clear, there's a balance that I invite you to find for yourself between relaxation and excitement. Because those nerves that you feel right before you get up in front of them, whether it's a small circle or a big circle, or a small audience, or a big audience, or a royal audience, or anything in between, those nerves are fuel, as long as they're serving you rather than tripping you up. Bringing yourself into a good, relaxed state, comfort. These are important things. This is the stuff that you have control over before you get up to perform. Breathing exercises sometimes help some people. Self-care is essential, especially when you know you have performance opportunities coming. If you're planning to go to Penzik or another big war event, bear in mind that the daily stresses of that event are going to be on you. So for Penzik in general, and for your performances in particular, you know, getting into good eating habits and sleeping habits and exercise habits well in advance are crucial. Vocal exercise habits daily are a great idea. There's some stuff on my blog. I believe there's a guy by the name of Eric Arsenault that I used. He does YouTube videos. I'm going to just type the name. Hopefully I remember correctly how to spell it. And if not, it should be close enough. There are many, many, many. You might like Eric Arsenault, but if not, just search voice exercises on YouTube. And about 3 hours later, you'll find someone who's just perfect for you. You know, but just knowing a few exercises that seem to really work for you and open yourself up. And before you think you need it, which is to say at least 2 months before you are in a position to be performing, start doing that every day. I do them in the shower. Hydrate. I put this in caps and italicized this line. Do not forget to have water with you when you're performing. Please. Your future self will thank you. Your performing self will thank you. Your audience will thank you. Okay? Every performer in every context, no audience anywhere is ever going to in any way be slightly annoyed that a performer has a source of water to keep themselves hydrated. If you're going to perform, you know, and again, I'm also speaking here in a lot of ways to concert performers. Having done half an hour and hour-long sets at Penzik, you gotta have water or you'll never make it through. It was super exciting to get to a place where I recognized I could get through an hour-long set and not feel any really noticeable strain until maybe the last bar of the last song. Because if I did that, I'd gotten it done, especially since whoever I was opening for was probably going to have a much bigger audience than I did, which meant that last song was going to the biggest crowd I was going to have all night. So, a couple more things, getting back to the plant your feet. Planting your feet literally, okay, is a piece of advice I got from Zoph, I got from John. It as a one-liner, the reason I made that the hook of the song is it really, and at the risk of my only being partly garbed, okay, this is about, it's about stance. My feet are shoulder width apart, and I can breathe. And planting them like this grounds me. It feels strong. And now I get to make conscious choices about what I'm going to do with my voice, with my eyes, with my hands, with my space, with the audience's attention. Movement. It is always going to be a temptation, and sometimes it is a good instinct to choose movement when you're performing. Walking up to someone that you have in your mind cast as Beowulf in your children's version of Beowulf. I've seen this done really, really well. It's hilarious. You know, Grendel was mad, and having picked someone that you knew as a friend was going to be tickled because they're the person you point to every time you talk about Grendel being mad is hilarious. These are choices. You need to find that balance where you can make those choices quickly, either before you get up or as soon as you get up. But don't be turning them over from the time you start performing. Make them, or make them on the fly. Movement when you're on stage or in any context performing should be conscious and deliberate. I have been a performer. My son, Spencer, has been a performer. I've seen a few performers who are alive with nervous energy when they perform, and it's in their feet, and they have happy feet, and they have excited feet, and they have dancey feet. And what it means is they're bouncing around constantly as they perform, and they're moving around, and it robs them, I think, of some of the power their performance could have. I've had a few performers that I consider friends who, at the behest in one case of Zoph, I passed along her observation. They need to plant their feet. And all I had to say was, you need to plant your feet. I said that to my son, and the next time he got up to tell that story he'd made up, sea change. He just kept his feet on the floor and only stepped when and where he felt it was appropriate, and it changes everything. Use your audience. They're there for you, especially as a bard. Okay, play with them. Like a lawyer, don't ever ask a question you don't think you know the answer to. Okay, but if the audience has energy, if you could use a rhythm and you don't have a rhythm player with you, or you want a particular kind of communal rhythm, ask for the clap and prompt them. Won't work over this though. Don't do it over don't do it over Zoom because lag. But in a live environment, which hopefully we're all going to get to be in sometime soon, it's amazing. If you have a song with a repeating chorus, invite them, teach them. Feel free to take a minute to teach them the chorus if you wish. Or if you feel, it's going to be easy to pick up, say, listen the first time. And over time, of course, they may get to know your material. They may start just jumping in on that chorus. Marion of Heatherdale has a really, really polite way to say, I want you with me on the chorus. The verses, please, are mine. And it's helpful because if the audience is singing along with you through the whole song, then they may be pulling focus, and they can definitely be pulling you out of the moment as the performer. Ask for what you want. As much as possible, take the moment and set this up before you start to perform. Take a moment to think about how you're going to introduce your piece, or ideally short, 1 to 2 sentences. If it needs more than that, think about why. Think about what purpose you're really serving. And my invitation to you is, if you have a longer explanation, you should have a blog by now. And you can tell them after the performance is over that you're going to share all about the detailed inspirations behind that piece on your blog. I always do it after I've debuted a new piece. So people who get to know me know that if they really want to know all the ridiculous sources I put into such and such, it'll be on the blog later, which means I can just do a one-line introduction. There are a number of contexts where an introduction is really, really helpful. If you've ever been in an environment where you're given topic challenges or forum challenges, Winter Nights in the East Kingdom, which is a mutation of Bardic Madness that is specific to the ultra competitive East, but it's also a laid-back competition that I really love. We often give each other oxhide challenges. We are paired up, we get up, we offer each other a one-liner, and the goal is to be in that sweet spot. I want to test you a little bit. I want to stretch you a little bit. I'm not trying to throw you under the bus. I'm not trying to stick a knife in your back. I'm also not trying to give you a softball. I want to throw you something that I don't think I've heard from you. And you know you've done it well when the other bards there who all know you somewhat go, ooh, because they haven't heard you do anything like that either, and they want to know, are you ready? And then you have time to get ready, you come back. At that moment, the introduction is your friend. I like to call it the Bardic Shoehorn, where sometimes the challenge of fire, which I was once given, I decide to give an introduction of how I'm going to give you metaphor fire. A fire kindled idly in passion that burns for years unattended and ends by consuming everything it touches. And then I launch into my bastard's revenge song. Sometimes that works. There's just all sorts of fun things you can do. You can segue, you can shift the mood, you can, especially in Bardic circles, which is where we're going to do a lot of this, the opportunity to express whether you are continuing or answering something you heard earlier in the evening, or very deliberately changing the mood abruptly. Wow, that was tragic and wonderful, and it blew my mind, and I am going to completely change the mood up to a really, really, I hope you'll find funny drinking song. You know, just take the moment, guide them where you want them to go, and go. It can be that simple. Oh, okay. Crucial. And I've mentioned this, but I want to spend a minute or two on it before, if nothing else, before we finish. So, just as I'm a software developer, so I can say this, all software has bugs. All performers make flubs. Every performer face plants. You will. How you handle it in that moment is a piece of your stage presence. Do you have the presence of mind to gut it out, to make it through, to recover, even if you have to pause, without apologizing? Apology, I want to go back to where I started. Stage presence is a gift to your audience. Stage presence is an invitation, an offer of confidence and competence that makes your audience safe, that lets them go on an emotional journey with you. An apology, no matter how well intended, no matter how upset you are with yourself, no matter how frustrated you are in that moment, makes the audience responsible for your happiness instead of you being responsible for theirs. Everybody get that? When you apologize to someone, you're asking for them to forgive you. You are putting emotional weight on their shoulders. You are making them emotionally caretake you. And look, there will be times when maybe that's really what it feels like and you need it. Ideally, you can get that caretaking after you sit down. You have people who are safe. You have people who know you. And just as SCA audiences in particular will be impressed, will be blown away, will be delighted when they see you struggle at times with something that is beyond what they thought you were capable of because you're learning and growing, recovering, toughing it out, staying in the moment and continuing to sing or do whatever you were doing or find your peace without requiring the audience to intervene for you in any way, reinforces for them that they don't have to take care of you because you're there to take care of them. It is a mark of professionalism and competence. It is a mark of vulnerability and growth. I did a very early lute piece when I was only a year in for a baronial competition. And I flubbed. I started dropping notes in the third verse, and I kept singing. I kept singing. I didn't break rhythm, and one stanza later, my fingers found their place again and got me through. I have it on the YouTube site. I try not to bury my mistakes most of the time. As it turns out, the Baron had been a musician, a working musician, in some capacity. He knew what it was like to do modern, like rock shows. And what he confided in me afterwards was, the moment that I saw you recover, toughed it out, you didn't stop, you didn't drop a beat in your singing. And the moment I saw that you were able to stay with it, not lose focus, keep us in with you in it until your fingers found their place again, was the moment I knew you were our bard. It's challenging. And it's so tempting to want to apologize because you feel you've let the audience down. The audience is composed of your friends, including friends you don't know yet. They're there for you. They do support you. But if you support them, they'll never forget it. And they will be so excited for the next time they get to see you perform. The next time they get to see you perform that piece, or a piece like that in difficulty. And they will all just, this place is built out of love. This society is built out of the love we have for each other and the love we have for ourselves. The kindness that we're willing to give ourselves when we fumble, when we try something hard, when we bring everything we had to the day and it doesn't go our way. The ability to come out of that and say, hey, that's the next piece. As I go home, what did I just learn today? I learned something about how I can face plant in front of an audience and it's okay. And the world didn't end. And nobody thinks less of me, and my friends still love me. Okay, fine. Juggling knives, next year's goal for me, okay? Because that's definitely a little out of my wheelhouse. But that's fair. If you dropping a prop, I like that. Dropping a prop, applauding and cheering until it becomes part of the act. Here, one to end with real quick. So there was an online performance of Beowulf, which I got to do with my two current peers, my teachers, Toki and Peregrine. I got to perform in between them. And it was the first time I tried to do something like that. It was a live Zoom YouTube performance. And these were some of my favorite bards. And to be in that lineup was just so exciting, to get to go toward the end. And I got partway through my 2.5 minutes, and I discovered the hard way that apparently I hadn't shut off the ringer on our phone because our landline went off. And I picked it up, tapped it, put it down, and kept going. You know, I didn't stop. I just dealt with it at that moment. I didn't know that was going to happen. And quietly, privately behind, you know, on the chat of the Zoom call, people are like, dude, way to not get flustered. These are the moments, you know, I don't look for them, but these moments happen. My friend Solveig, the lights went out in the middle of her second round Royal Bardic performance. The whole place went black. She kept singing. She made it to the finals that year. You know, these are the things that happen. This is what stage presence means to me. And I look forward to seeing in this year and the coming years, all of the ways in which you bring your authentic best self, all of the ways in which you share with the right people, all the sweat equity that goes into these amazing performances you're going to be doing. And on stage, I'm looking forward to seeing just the joy, just the practice, and just the awareness and the confidence for where you're going to take me and the people sitting around me or stand. Thank you all so much for your time.